Hello there, welcome to Fridays at Noon. I'm Michael Chen, the executive producer and director for this talk show series. Fridays at Noon is a bi-weekly lunch and learn series that offers education on professional development topics to the University of Denver employees. For more information and to view past videos, please visit du.edu/HR and click on the People Development link. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the show.
And bring your lunch.
And bring your lunch.
Welcome to Fridays at Noon. My name is Ken Pennock. I'm the Director of People Development for the University of Denver. And today I'm pleased to welcome our Manager of People Development, Greg Giesen. And we're going to be talking with you about the 8 simple rules of conflict management that actually Greg created with the work that he's been doing and has done with organizations. I do want to mention that you can watch the previous session we did, rule number 1 on 8 simple rules in our Fridays at Noon series, and that is on the People Development website. And so, but before we get started on rule number 2, can we do a review of rule number 1?
Yeah, let's
as we
do
continue
that.
this series.
All right, just to kind of get people caught up. Rule number 1 is begin with the end in mind. And obviously taking off of Stephen Covey's concept, which is to be thinking about what you want while you're planning and interacting in a conflict. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but that's really one of the best ways to set yourself up for success, is to be focused on outcomes in an interaction that involves a conflicting situation. This will help people stay positive, constructive, and focused on results during the conversation, and it will also help them be less inclined to get caught up in the dynamics, the personality of the other person, the environment where it's taking place. Because if you're focused, it's easier to stick to your guns, so to speak. And here's a metaphor I want to kind of throw out. Like, imagine. Maybe not the greatest metaphor, but imagine you're tied to this belay rope and it's pulling you forward and you're going through a wind tunnel. And that with all the wind and distractions and pulling you, but yet you're still moving forward. And what that belay rope really represents is being focused on outcomes, because that way you can kind of go right through the dynamics and get to where you need to go. And the other thing, Ken, I just want to mention, because we talked about this on the first video, your mindset has a lot to do with it. So part of preparing with the end in mind is to know if you have a negative mindset, either about the person or the situation, that it's a good thing to kind of think through that a little bit and get to more of a neutral place before the conversation, because it's going to set you up for greater success. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
It seems also that by focusing on, with the end in mind, it might help at least minimize digging into a position. When we
exactly.
start arguing about a certain point rather than the overall
And
goal.
what that also says too is there's value in preparation.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, and as a reminder, these rules are available on our website. Is that correct?
Yeah, and in fact, we have an article section on the People Development website, and there's a separate article for all 8 of these rules. But also, on our Fridays at Noon page, under the Rule 1, there'll be the article. We'll have the PDF of the article, and then after this show, we'll put a PDF of article for Rule 2 right under it. And in fact, I would say to our viewers who are watching this right now, is it would behoove you to print out that particular article, especially today's article where there's a visual, so you can follow along. It just might make it a little bit easier.
Good. And so, well, let's jump to this. Tell us about rule number 2 of the 8 simple rules.
All right. Rule number 2 is stay off the ladder. And where that came from is it's the ladder of inference that you can see here that's in your handouts. That comes from Peter Senge's book, The 5th Discipline Field Book. And what I did is I took that model and I adapted it and adjusted it to fit in this conflict model. with permission, I might add, because it really works well with this concept. And let me just start by posing 3 questions to the audience and to you. Have you ever been cut off by a driver on the road and impulsively gave them some feedback?
Yes. I cannot tell a lie.
Have you ever said something that you didn't mean to somebody?
Yes. Audience, can you imagine? Yes.
Have you ever misjudged somebody only to find out later that you were wrong about that judgment?
Yes.
And if our audience and you and me, if we all answered at least yes to one of those, then actually we have used the model before. And so here's what I want to do is just walk you through just real quickly. And if you can kind of see this, and again, follow along with your handouts. But basically, in all those situations, what happened is this is the bottom of the ladder is what you were doing. The next rung up says selected data, and that's essentially what happened. So in other words, in the situation, something happened. And then that's where your focus immediately goes, whether it was a comment, somebody cutting you off, something that didn't feel right, whatever. And now you're here. And then what happens if you continue to go up the ladder, you actually make a judgment about the situation. And the judgment's made from meaning, assumptions, draw a conclusion. And the higher up you get, in many respects, the more solidified you get to where you form a belief. And if you're not able to stop yourself at any of these points, you go right into taking an action, like giving feedback to somebody on the road, where it probably almost felt like there was no thought process involved. It was immediate.
And similar to making a judgment on someone without all of the facts.
And you can literally go up the ladder in less than a second.
Why do we go up this ladder so quickly?
Here's the thing about this is, and it's one of the keys to conflict, is it becomes almost like an autopilot response. And that's a bad thing in conflict, because what it means is there's very little, if any, thought process between what I would call the stimulus response. The stimulus was the guy that cut you off. The response was, you idiot, know, and all within a second, right? But I want to show the audience kind of, and this is really what causes that. And you can kind of see this. It's stimulus response. The autopilot turns into a stimulus response dynamic where the stimulus causes a response. So a comment or somebody cuts you off, there's an immediate response. And what happens with stimulus response mindset, and it's very dangerous in many respects. I mean, it's not dangerous to teach a dog how to, go out a doggy door.
Right.
But when it's coming to about human dynamics and how people interact, it can be very dangerous. And what it does is it creates the autopilot, because then anything that looks, smells, or resembles the stimulus, this response automatically kicks in to the point where almost your brain has very little to do with it over time, because it becomes automatic. And what occurs in this situation is you lose control, because there's not a thought process involved. It's stimulus right to a response. And so what that does is it can make people feel like a victim. That you caused me to feel this way. It was your comment that did this. It's your lousy driving that made me do this. And then all of a sudden, in that stimulus response, we immediately feel victimized and we blame the stimulus for the response. And the other part of this that leads into the next point I want to make is that it can become an unconscious process. Right, so you're not conscious. You almost do it on the autopilot piece. And what I would say to people is it's really beneficial to identify those areas where we have that stimulus response, autopilot, unconscious, immediate response to things, because that's never going to help us. And what we have to do is actually reverse the mindset. And here's how it actually works. And this has to do with the ladder. And that is, there's a stimulus, but before, the response isn't tied to the stimulus. What the response is tied to is where we go on the ladder in our interpretation of the stimulus. So in other words, even if it's in a second, we've made a snap judgment that we made based on our interpretation of the stimulus. And And as a result, in this model, what occurs is the stimulus, then we interpret it, and then the response. Now, what that does, by being able to see this relationship, is it gives us back control. Because if you think about it, the control piece is here.
Is the latter.
The stimulus didn't cause it. It was our interpretation that caused the response. Now, all of a sudden, we have control over our responses, where in the stimulus response thinking, we didn't. They caused it. But in reality, we actually, by our interpretation, created it. It's also a conscious process, because to be aware of going up the ladder is a way to then stop yourself at some point and going, is this in my best interest to continue? And I know it's hard in those 1 second
moment.
ones to do that, but you can actually get to a point where when you're conscious of the moment instead of in a subconscious state, you're actually choosing to do something versus letting it just occur. And that creates the control piece. And so that's kind of the key with this model. And with all the 8 rules and the 8 simple rules, it's kind of a common theme, which is to override, to override the subconscious piece. And the way to do that is really through mindfulness.
I was going to say, this sounds like this ladder is kind of the antithesis of being mindful when we're reacting so immediately.
Because it's another, we're all hearing all about these mindfulness things, and it,
Right.
to get us be calm in the moment. But what it also does is it creates awareness about what we're doing and what we're thinking, where we can still make a choice. Because the danger in this model is, let's say that somebody cuts you off, you draw a conclusion that they're a complete idiot, and your belief is they need some feedback, and you actually honk or gesture to them, and all of a sudden they get triggered and want to
Respond back.
and now you've created a situation because you were unable to stop yourself really before, particularly that last rung.
And it also would, of course, inhibit the learning or awareness about how your own behavior contributed to the problem, which we, of course, see in relationships between managers and their employees.
Yeah, because whenever you hear somebody saying, you made me feel this way, you did this to me, you did that, that's stimulus response thinking. And that's what's got to be overridden if you want to change the dynamic, your reactions to it, and what it does to you really physically and mentally in the moment.
Well, is it bad then to go up the ladder, given that we all do it, as I admitted, not all the audience did, but we all do this. So is it?
Here's the thing. If you're going up the ladder and you're conscious of it and you choose to take the action, then I would say no, because it was a conscious choice. You've overridden the subconscious. But that's not usually what happens. What happens is this autopilot thing based on our own histories, our own experiences, where we become judge and jury in the moment. And then if we get to taking an action, we also, create some kind of punishment or some kind of situation in that, all within that time frame. And that's when it's not. And let me give you an example. There was, in a corporation, there was a guy who wanted to become a manager. And he wanted to do all the right things, get recognized, and that was his career plan. And one day, the group of managers approached him and asked him to come to their meeting because whatever he was working on, they wanted him to report out on. And of course, he's thinking. Of course, he's going up the ladder a little bit, more in a positive way, which we'll talk about, but. He's like, this is it. This is my opportunity. And if I impress them, they're going to think I'm one of them. And this will be, he's getting all pumped up. So he goes to the meeting and he's got his, presentation ready to go. And he nails it. And they're all like, that was excellent. And, and he's like, yes. And then one of them says to him, why don't you stick around for the rest of the meeting? Which was probably the greatest thing he could have heard because, it made him feel like he was part of the group, right? But he got very comfortable all of a sudden, because he was riding this wave. And they started talking about other issues. And he started to chime in on them. And he didn't really know where to shut up, basically, And he made a comment. And one of the managers in the room immediately goes, that's stupid. And everybody laughed. And there he was in that moment, like, wait a minute. And so he was in the meeting. Comment was, that's stupid. Now all of a sudden he's starting to add meaning, make assumptions, draw conclusions, and what he came to was, first off, he felt that was rude to say that, and they all laughed, which didn't help at all, because now they're all making fun of him. This is his story he's building, and he draws a conclusion that guy makes those kind of comments a lot. He doesn't like that guy, and he went too far, and the belief is that this isn't right, and it just so happened that particular manager who made that comment was having a meeting later that day that this person was invited to. So he decided in this moment of rage to blow off the meeting, that he was just going to say he was going to come and not show, which was kind of in a way in this organization to kind of, show disrespect.
Right.
And just no show, because he wanted him to pay for that. Now, so my question to you and to the audience would be, so what's wrong with that? What are the problems in that particular situation, if you think about it?
It can certainly lead us to behave in a way that was not intended, and communicate in a way that we certainly don't want to communicate. This is a challenge that many HR professionals have in working with them, coaching them. They're always very concerned, similar to your example, about what do people think, what are they saying, or what are they not saying, and immediately going up this ladder.
Yeah, and a couple other things related to that is it's one-sided, right? He never actually knew what the comment meant, why they laughed. It might not have even had anything to do with his comment.
Right.
He just made that assumption. Right. He became judge and jury and then sentenced the manager by punishing him by not showing up. And that's the danger of the model, is if you don't catch yourself and realize that the ladder's one-sided. And in order to effectively work the ladder, what you have to do is stop yourself before you take an action, and then question, is this in my best interest, and what's missing? And if what's missing is the other side of the story, then that's where the focus needs to be, not on continuing on this vein. And that's the danger about this. Plus, it's not fair to the other manager for someone else to make a judgment about something he said without knowing what the intent was or why he said it, right?
I could see this could be very disruptive to career growth, let alone interpersonal relationships. Our relationships, we do this. Do we communicate any differently depending upon where we are?
Yeah, and let me give you an example. Let's take that scenario that I just shared with you, okay? Let's say you're that manager, and I'm the wannabe manager that got offended. Okay, so there's two ways I could communicate with you. So I'm going to communicate with you now, and then let's dissect what part of the ladder that communication came from, and then I'll do it again.
Okay.
All right. So if I'm just fed up. You just crossed the line, and I'm going to barge into your office, and I'm going to go, what in the world did you say that for? And I don't appreciate you talking to me like that, and you embarrassed me in front of all these other managers. That wasn't right, and I resent what you said. Okay, so let's say I said that. Now, if you look at the ladder, what's the top part or the lower part did it come from?
Probably the lower part.
Well, if you think about it, did I have judgment? Did I accuse you? Did I already make a decision about your motives?
Yes.
And if that's the case, then I have already, because here it's still somewhat neutral, and then it starts to get more and more tainted, and by the time you're up here, it's totally non-tainted. You're opinionated.
So all of this happens even before an interaction may even occur.
Yeah.
Which goes to the point that many times we don't know what other people, what's going on with them.
Yeah.
What's going on with their day, with their life, their
exactly. And when people speak with judgment and emotion, it's from the top of the ladder because they've already made a conclusion about the situation. Well, if I actually communicate that way with you, would you be defensive a little bit?
Yes.
And if I'm under you, that could be political suicide, right? For me to do that kind of thing.
Right.
All right, so let's do it again, and I'm going to do it a different way.
Okay.
All right, so now let's say I come in your office and I say, Ken, is this a good time? I just have a question. All right. And then I say, this might sound kind of silly, but in the meeting yesterday, which I loved being there, thank you for that, you guys were commenting later, and I had made a comment about one of the things that was brought up, and I believe I heard you make the statement, "That's stupid," and then people laughed. And I wasn't sure what that meant, and if it was in relation to what I said or not. Can you just clarify that for me? Because I don't want to look like an idiot in front of you guys. Now, how did that feel compared to the first one?
Very different. You were owning it, so it wasn't
Yeah.
that I necessarily did something.
Yeah,
But it
and
was
I
coming
came
from
in
you.
objective.
Right.
Right?
Not assuming.
So that's kind of like where you're right about here. You're still in that objective part, and the difference is that I caught myself. I knew what belief I was forming, but I'm like, no, wait a minute, that's not fair. I don't know that. I need to, and so I started climbing down the ladder. So when I communicated with you, I was somewhere down here, very constructive place to have a conversation on the ladder, and that's kind of how the communication looks different from different parts of the ladder.
So then this can be, it appears this could apply to positive assumptions as well.
It is, yeah, same thing. You can form a positive. You can take an action, draw a conclusion, all that from a positive dynamic, and still be one-sided, and still not have all of the facts. So it does work that way as well. The one thing I want to mention too is another example. So I've got a buddy who speaks ladder. And what that, because most people, this works really well, by the way, when a department does it together and they have common language and they can all tease each other and have fun with this. But so this is what he said to me one day, because apparently I had said something that triggered him the day before at a meeting. Somewhat similar to the example I gave, but somewhat different. But he came up to me and he goes, "You said something yesterday," and this is how he talks. He goes, "And I found myself going up the ladder, and I wanted to check with you about what you said." When he said that, I felt like that was one of the most respectful things I've heard anybody say, because he's acknowledged that he got a little triggered, but he's also saying, I need your opinion. I need to know what you meant, and he's being real open and forthright with it. And that's the kind of relationship this guy has, and that's an example of talking the ladder. You don't have to use ladder data, but he knew I knew the ladder.
And he's also, once again, I'm also hearing owning it. So he's owning it versus what you, quote, did to me.
And he's withholding any kind of judgment until he has all the information. And if you think about it, that's probably one of the most respectful things people can do in a conflict. Because the reason there is conflict, the reason why we mediate conflicts, is because people don't check in with each other when they go up the ladder, and each time it's a list of, they did this wrong, they're like this, I don't like this, and all of a sudden when we get to these conflicts, they got a list of issues, all of them unchecked ladders, and really, if you think about what we do in the mediations, a lot of them is we're going through ladders. We're like, okay, let's talk about that incident. What happened? What were you thinking? What did you mean? And then they're climbing down the ladder with help with a third party.
We certainly see this as well with managers working the ladder with employees regarding performance, where they're immediately jumping. And you see this play out in performance feedback sessions.
Or you can even see employees having an opinion about their boss.
That's right.
Same kind of thing based on what they're pulling out. Because in this one, you pull out the data, and then you focus in on that, and you're missing everything else, because this is the part that it's what they said, what they did, and that becomes the triggering point. And then we make a case essentially after it. We all do it.
We do.
The other thing I want to mention before we go on is that there are also what's called second-hand ladders.
So what's the second?
Can you guess what that might be?
I better not. I don't want to assume. So
a second-hand ladder is, let's say you had an experience with somebody that was bad, and you come to me to vent. And so I wasn't there. I didn't have the experience, but just from your venting, I'm taking what happened to you, and I'm making my own opinion of that person just to support you, and I don't need any other evidence. I don't need a first-hand experience. And it's what triggers gossip in the workplace.
Interesting.
Is these ladders, and it gets more interesting when it's gossip, because you like he said what, and you get caught up in that, and that's part of the dysfunction of the ladder dynamic too in groups.
Interesting.
Is it can go that direction.
Well, in looking at the ladder, what the bypass? What is that?
Yeah, the bypass is. What happens in a bypass is either one of two things. Either you had an event that was significant enough, even could be a one-time event that was so traumatic that you formed such a strong opinion that you're no longer taking more information, that anything they do based on that one traumatic thing, you're going to go right to this belief about that person. So that almost they don't have a chance to rectify the relationship. And so that's one way. Or it could be somebody that has reoccurring, like they're always late, they're always this, they're always that. And I'm not saying sometimes it's not correct, but what happens is we form a bypass where we're no longer taking any new information, that anything they do, we fit it into this image we have of them, so they can't, nothing will ever change, because anything they say or do, it's like, see, there you go again, that's how you are. And the danger of that is a relationship goes to a stalemate place. And like in our case, there might be people out there or with our audience that have bypasses on us based on something we did or said. And if they're not bringing it forward, we'll never know. But their behavior just kind of are guarded around us any time. And I don't know about you, but I would prefer to never have anybody have a bypass, because I believe I'm changing all the time, and if somebody has an issue, I want to talk it out, because I wouldn't have intended for it to ever be that way.
Right.
That's why there's got to be communication about this. But I want to give you a quick story too. This is a personal story. So when I was married, there was this one couple that we enjoyed a lot, and we would periodically get together, and they'd come over to our house for dinner or something. Well, a pattern started to happen, whereas like right before, either the day before or even hours before, they'd cancel. Something would come up, and first time, no biggie. Second time, it's like, okay, that is twice, So here we are, we're having this another event just with them. And this is the night before, and like a Friday night, and they call, and I've got my cell phone, and I see it's from him. And immediately, I look at my wife before I answer it. I'm like, here we go. You ready? I'm like, hello? Because I was forming a bypass. Like, anytime they're going to cancel, and he's like, we're going to have to cancel. I'm like, oh, that's too bad. And I'm looking at my wife like, see? And I'm like, oh, really? That's too bad. He goes, yeah, Carolyn's parents are coming into town, last minute. And I'm like, oh, okay, no problem. And part of me's thinking, you couldn't have planned that. You couldn't have brought them over.
Right.
Oh,
right.
okay, whatever.
All the stories
it just
we
felt,
make up.
I was feeling insulted, because it's 3 times, right? I'm like, okay, sorry, and then I hung up, right? And then I look at my wife. I'm like, see, that's it. We're not inviting them. Whenever you like that, see, that's it. No more. That's when you got to bypass. That gives you a clue. Come to find out, she just found out that day she had stage 4 cancer.
Oh.
And the reason her parents were coming was to be supportive, to
Right,
be right
because
there
of
with her.
things.
They just didn't tell us because they hadn't dealt with it yet. And I felt like such a fool when I found out. I'm like, who am I to be that judgmental of people anyways? So it was a really good lesson for me. But that's an example of how the bypass can really interfere with relationships.
Is there a way to interrupt that bypass even within ourselves? Is it a matter of being mindful, or whether it's taking a breath or having a trigger word of stop, or to awareness?
I mean, one way is the people around you. Like if you're married or you have a significant other, the other, if you talk about it, the other person can, kind of play devil's advocate if they see you doing that. Okay. Or open and honest communication with the people we're closest to would make it so it never kind of got stuck anywhere. You know, it's fluid. If it's fluid, you can at least talk about it. But if you notice you're doing it, and it goes back to the mindful piece, like in the class, the conflict class, you know, we'll do an exercise where people get to kind of reflect on, do I have any bypasses going on with anybody, and how is it benefiting me to hold on to those? Like, could that relationship flourish if I didn't have it? And then that can start to create the awareness, and then you start to go down the ladder and you realize, take each situation uniquely and be open and honest in the moment, and then it never builds. You know, but when you have animosity towards somebody or you've prejudged them, it builds very fast. So somebody cutting you off, it's really easy to make a judgment about they're an idiot, but there's so much that we don't know about what might have caused that. And who are we to judge anyways in the first place, right?
I think that's a good way. I keep coming back to really being self-aware and really... Also, I would imagine knowing your own personal triggers or biases may help as well.
Totally,
Well, so where can we find out more information about the second step of the 8 simple rules of conflict management?
And I would say, you know, probably 2 ways right off the bat. One is to attend the class, the 8 simple rules class here at DU. Second one is to read the article that's right below the this video. And those are probably the 2 primary places to do it. And just to really, and I would encourage people, this whole mindfulness stuff, it's related to so many things, but particularly conflict management, because it ties into all 8 rules.
Oh, that's great. It's really a foundational one.
Yeah, very much so.
In addition to the begin with the end in mind. Well, I want to thank our audience for coming today and participating with us. And thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
For this discussion and sharing. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next Fridays at noon. Thank you.